Sometimes it's not the end of a relationship that breaks you. It's who you have to become just to survive it. Ex-husband flaunts his fiancée, unaware his ex-wife's new boyfriend is a billionaire. Sophie Bennett never imagined she'd come face to face with her ex-husband, Daniel Blake, again, especially not like this. The last time they'd spoken, they had just signed their divorce papers and parted ways amid heartbreak, resentment, and unspoken blame. Now, 2 years later, Daniel was parading his glamorous fiancée, Madison Lee, around a high-profile charity gala, completely oblivious to the life-altering secret behind Sophie's new boyfriend, Julian Carter. What Daniel didn't know was that Julian wasn't just another generous donor. He was a billionaire, a man with global influence and unimaginable wealth, poised to sweep Sophie into a world of luxury she had never dared dream of. Outside a small cafe on Elm Street, the rain hammered the windows as Sophie sipped her cappuccino. It was an unusually cold afternoon for mid-June, and the cafe, called Brew Haven, buzzed with locals seeking warmth and refuge from the downpour. Dressed in a simple navy blouse and worn jeans, Sophie felt a strange calm, touched with faint anxiety. A year ago, she wouldn't have believed she'd be here, alone, but at peace, healing from the emotional wreckage of her marriage. There was something oddly comforting in the mundane hum of the cafe, the clink of cups, the low murmur of conversation, the steady rhythm of rain. For the first time in a long while, she felt rooted in the present. But even in that comfort, shadows of the past lurked quietly. Her thoughts wandered back to that final day with Daniel. Their goodbye had been filled with anger, regret, and enough tears to flood a city. They had started out as idealistic college lovers, convinced that love alone could conquer everything. But over the years, Daniel's relentless ambition hardened into cold competitiveness, and Sophie's hope for a supportive partner was crushed by constant judgment and dismissiveness. The fights came often, about money, their lifestyles, their future. Each argument left behind invisible scars, words that lingered long after they'd been said. He had dismissed her aspirations, made her feel small in rooms where she had once felt seen. Eventually, the fractures in their marriage deepened beyond repair. A blaring car horn outside yanked her from the memory. She glanced down at her phone, checking for messages. Julian Carter, the man she'd been dating for the past 2 months, had promised to meet her after a business meeting. From there, they'd planned to attend a gallery showcase hosted by her longtime friend, Amy Nguyen, a rising curator in the local art scene. Still, Sophie couldn't shake that small voice in her head urging caution. Not to hope too much. But Julian had never given her any reason to doubt him. He was kind, respectful, and shockingly humble for someone who could buy the entire block if he felt like it. His generosity often left her speechless, and it wasn't just the gifts or lavish gestures, it was the way he listened, the way he respected her space, the way he made her feel visible without demanding anything in return. Just then, the bell above the cafe door jingled. Sophie looked up, expecting Julian. Instead, her heart stopped. Daniel Blake stepped inside, shaking rain from his umbrella. He hadn't changed much, still tall, still confident, still carrying that faint touch of arrogance in the way he surveyed the room. Sophie's stomach twisted, a familiar ache rising from somewhere deep. She thought for a second about hiding behind her coffee cup, but it was too late. He had already seen her. "Sophie?" Daniel said, walking toward her table with cautious curiosity. "Wow, long time no see." He was dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than a month's rent in downtown Seattle. His hair, once tousled and carefree, was now perfectly styled. He looked every bit the polished executive he'd always aspired to be. Daniel glanced at the seat across from her. Without waiting for her to say a word, he pulled it out and sat down, completely ignoring the line of customers still waiting behind him. Typical Daniel. Always had to make himself the center of the moment. "Yes, it's been a while," Sophie replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Despite her best efforts, her hands trembled slightly. She set her coffee cup back down gently onto the saucer to keep from spilling it. It felt surreal, sitting across from him again, so unexpectedly. Her mind flashed with images of the ugly fights, the blame games, the cold silences. Arguments over money, who sacrificed more, who gave more to their failing marriage. She took a slow, even breath. She wasn't going to let those ghosts of the past disrupt the peace she had fought so hard to reclaim. You look well, Daniel continued. I heard you moved back into the city. How have you been? He tried to smile, but it was stiff, awkward, two strangers pretending they hadn't once shared a life. I've been fine, Sophie replied simply, taking it one day at a time. And you, she added. Busy as always. Just met with a client nearby, he said, drumming his fingers on the table, a nervous tic she hadn't seen in years. Then he hesitated. Listen, I know things ended badly. Sophie braced herself, expecting him to bring up the past like a blade. But instead, he cleared his throat and picked up a napkin, pretending to wipe away a non-existent spill, stalling. Maybe he was feeling some twinge of guilt after all. She saw it flicker in his eyes before he said, But I do hope you're okay. I am, she said softly. She didn't know if that was entirely true, or if it was just what she needed to believe. Then the cafe door swung open again, ushering in a burst of wind and drizzle. Sophie's heart leapt. Julian walked in, tall and refined, wearing a perfectly tailored navy blazer and matching slacks. He scanned the cafe with calm precision, and the moment he spotted Sophie, a warm smile spread across his face. Daniel followed her gaze. Confusion clouded his features. Sophie, Julian called, walking over with an easy confidence. Sorry I'm late. The meeting ran long. Julian placed a gentle hand on Sophie's shoulder and leaned down to kiss her softly on the cheek. Daniel arched an eyebrow. So, this is? Sophie felt a brief wave of awkwardness surge through her chest. Daniel, this is Julian Carter, my boyfriend, she said, steadying her voice. Julian, this is Daniel Blake, my ex-husband. The tension that instantly blanketed the table was thick, almost physical. Julian, composed as ever, extended his hand with a calm smile. Nice to meet you. Daniel took it, but with visible reluctance. Likewise, he said. His voice was measured, but his eyes betrayed something else, analyzing Julian like a competitor across a high-stakes boardroom table. Well, Daniel said after a pause, straightening his collar, I'd better get going. Need to pick up Madison. At the mention of her name, Sophie felt a sudden pang, like an old bruise pressed too hard. Madison. She remembered Daniel bringing her up once, back when their marriage was in its last, flickering phase. A coworker he'd praised too often. Maybe Sophie had been paranoid back then, or maybe she hadn't. Either way, hearing the name now stoked something sharp and simmering beneath the surface. Daniel clearly had moved on, engaged, apparently. She quickly composed herself, masking any emotion with a practiced smile. Nice running into you, Daniel. He nodded, glancing at Julian. And nice to meet you, Mr. Carter. Maybe we'll cross paths again? Perhaps, Julian said politely. With that, Daniel turned and exited the cafe, leaving behind a lingering trail of expensive cologne and a dozen unresolved questions. Julian pulled out the chair across from Sophie and sat down, gently placing his hand over hers. Are you okay? Sophie forced a small smile. I'm fine, she murmured. Just caught off guard, that's all. If he ever bothers you, or if you need space, just say the word, Julian said, his voice soft but certain. No, it's okay, she said, shaking her head. I'm over him. At least, I think I am. She exhaled slowly, trying to shake the tight feeling in her chest. Daniel's presence still affected her, but not in the way it used to. It wasn't longing. It was the residue of something broken that had once meant everything. Let's just head to the gallery, she said, standing. Amy's expecting us. Julian nodded and rose to help her with her coat, ever the gentleman. As they stepped out into the rainy afternoon, Sophie realized Daniel had left behind more than just awkwardness. He'd reopened a door to emotions she thought she had locked away, and behind it, a tangled web of unfinished history was beginning to stir. A web that would soon challenge everything she thought she knew, and reveal truths no one was prepared to face. 2 days later, Sophie found herself seated in a sunlit corner of her apartment, sifting through old photo albums she had shoved into a storage box after the divorce. She wasn't entirely sure why this moment, of all times, had made her pull them out. Maybe seeing Daniel had triggered something, a wave of nostalgia, both tender and painful. The kind that seeped in quietly, catching her off guard as she turned the pages of a life she no longer lived. Each photo was a silent echo, tugging at the edges of memory, smiles frozen in time, unaware of the storms to come. Her phone chimed. It was a text from Amy Nguyen. Did you see the article in the Tribune about Daniel's engagement party? Apparently it's going to be huge. Like front page society section huge, you okay? Sophie frowned slightly, then typed back quickly. I'm fine, just a bit surprised. We ran into each other yesterday, Amy replied almost instantly, with a flood of shocked emojis. He's flaunting Madison hard. Word is she's from some ultra-wealthy family. Rumor is the event's going to be insanely over the top. If you need moral support, say the word. I'm there. Sophie let out a deep breath. So that was it. Daniel, ever obsessed with appearances and status, was going all in with this announcement. Loud, grand, meant for headlines. Deep down, a flicker of something sharp twisted in her chest. They had once talked about renewing their vows on their 10th anniversary. Something quiet, simple, surrounded by only close friends. That old dream now felt small and hollow, overshadowed by his new spectacle. What once had been intimate and sincere between them was now replaced with glitter and spectacle, like a performance meant more for cameras than commitment. Flipping through the photos again, her fingers landed on a picture from their college days. Daniel, messy-haired and full of life, was wrapping his arms around her in front of their old campus dorm. The sight of their younger, idealistic selves made her chest tighten. How had it all gone so wrong? They had believed in forever. Naively, maybe, but with an open heart. And now even that memory felt tainted. She gently set the photo aside, unwilling to let herself spiral into that space again. Her life had changed. She had changed. Since the divorce, she'd launched her own small but growing architecture firm, Bennett Design Studio. She'd kept the last name, ironically, because all her paperwork and branding were already under it. Clients were coming in steadily, and she was building something real, on her own terms. Every blueprint, every signed contract, every satisfied client felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. And then there was Julian. Just thinking about him softened the edges of her day. They had met at a charity gala Amy had dragged her to a few months ago. He'd been there low-key, introduced as a generous donor to various causes. They connected over a shared love for art, architecture, and travel. She didn't know much about his finances at first. Just vague mentions of an inheritance and partial ownership in tech empire his grandfather had helped found. Julian rarely talked about money. When he asked her out, she'd hesitated, unsure if she was ready. But there was something about him, steady, genuine, quietly warm, that made her want to try. With Julian, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything. He accepted her, not in spite of her past, but as someone who had survived it. They'd been seeing each other quietly ever since. Her phone pinged again. This time, it was from Julian himself. Early dinner tonight? Or I can swing by your studio and we grab drinks after. Sophie smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. Dinner sounds perfect. I'm headed to the studio for a few hours, but I'll be free by 6. See you then. She returned the photo albums to their box and tucked them away into a closet, hoping, maybe, she could do the same with the emotional baggage they carried. Daniel and Madison's lavish engagement party was bound to become tabloid fodder. Sophie could already picture the headlines. Still, she had to keep her focus forward, reminding herself that the past belonged in the past. And yet, something inside her whispered otherwise. A strange feeling she couldn't quite name. Like her story with Daniel wasn't finished, like their paths would cross again. And when they did, it wouldn't be quietly. It would be the kind of return that brought chaos in its wake. It was the kind of intuition that stirred under her skin, a sense of unfinished tension, like the final chapter of a book she thought she'd already closed. The soft chime above the entrance of the elegant French bistro rang out as Julian held the door open for her, his hand resting gently at the small of her back. Belle Maison, an upscale spot nestled in the Upper East Side, was known for its layered soufflés and immaculate wine pairings. Warm lighting from vintage chandeliers mingled with the soft pulse of jazz drifting through the room. The maitre d' recognized Julian instantly and ushered them to a private corner table, one that offered both discretion and comfort, far from curious eyes. Sophie took her seat, taking in the gleam of polished silverware and the crispness of the white linen napkins. Around them, a few other diners glanced their way, some with passing curiosity, others with recognition. It happened often. There was something about Julian, his quiet elegance, his aura, that drew attention. He didn't need to say a word. The world seemed to shift slightly to make room for him, as though it instinctively knew he belonged to a different echelon. Sophie had grown used to it. Whenever they dined out, someone always seemed to wonder, who is he? Julian met the stares with effortless poise, offering little more than a polite nod or a knowing smile. He never volunteered more than necessary. That unspoken restraint was something Sophie had come to admire. Where Daniel had craved validation, Julian exuded assurance. "I took the liberty of ordering your favorite red," he said, his smile making his eyes light up. "I thought we should celebrate your new contract." Sophie's lips lifted into a warm smile. Earlier that day, she had signed a deal with a boutique hotel chain, a major step for her young architecture studio. The firm had discovered her work on social media and reached out after falling in love with her designs. "That's so thoughtful," she said softly. "I still can't believe they chose me." Her voice trembled slightly, not from insecurity, but from the quiet awe of seeing years of hard work bloom into recognition. Julian reached across the table and gently took her hand in his. "You've earned it, Sophie. Every bit of it." A sommelier appeared, pouring the deep red into delicate crystal glasses. They toasted quietly, just the two of them. The soft chime of their glasses was barely audible over the music, but it felt momentous nonetheless. Sophie took a slow sip, savoring the velvety texture of the wine as it warmed her throat. They spent the next few moments catching up on their day, Julian mentioning an upcoming trip to London for a philanthropic summit, as always careful not to linger too long on financial details. Sophie, meanwhile, spoke with growing excitement about the upcoming design projects she had in the pipeline. Halfway through dinner, a luxurious orzo for her and seared salmon for him. Sophie was still mentally sketching concepts for the hotel chain project when Julian cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said, his eyes flicking down to his plate as though arranging the words in his mind, "about introducing you to some people in my circle. Friends, business colleagues. I want them to meet the amazing woman I'm with." Sophie paused, her fork hovering midair. "You do?" she asked, her heart giving a nervous flutter. They had only been dating for a couple of months, and though things felt real, it still felt like fragile ground beneath their feet. Meeting people in Julian's world sounded intense. His circle likely included CEOs, investors, philanthropists, powerful, influential people. Julian set down his napkin, his expression calm and open. "I'm not trying to rush anything, but there's a fundraiser next week. I'd love to have you there with me, if that's okay." A swirl of feelings stirred inside her. Curiosity, nervousness, a spark of excitement. And yes, fear too. "Of course," she said quietly. "I'd be honored." Julian's whole face brightened at her words. He reached for her hand again, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "Thank you," he said. "I'm really happy you're in my life, Sophie." They lingered over dessert, a decadent, flourless chocolate torte, sharing memories of childhood summers, favorite authors, and dream travel destinations. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sophie allowed herself to drift into the warmth of possibility, to believe that the past didn't have to chase her forever. Daniel's name hung silently in the air between them, but there was no need to speak it aloud. This night belonged to Julian, and to her. When they finally stepped out of Belle Maison, the bistro was closing. The cool night air greeted them, crisp and clean. Julian gently guided her toward a sleek black sedan waiting at the curb. "I'll take you home," he offered. Sophie remembered the first time he'd shown up with a driver, how she'd insisted on taking a cab instead, not quite ready to embrace that kind of luxury. But over time, she'd grown more comfortable, though she still insisted on paying her own way when she could. Inside the car, Julian slipped his arm around her shoulders, and she instinctively leaned in. She closed her eyes as the car glided through the city. Streetlights streaked past the windows, and the quiet hum of the engine lulled her into a calm, hopeful reverie. In that moment, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe her life could move forward. Maybe she could let go of the heartbreak that had once threatened to define her. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of Sophie's architecture studio. She sat at her drafting table, pencil in hand, finalizing the initial sketches for the boutique hotel project. Each line she drew grew into elegant curves and thoughtful arches, capturing her vision of something both modern and welcoming. The desk phone rang, snapping Sophie out of her creative flow. Bennett Design Studio, Sophie Bennett speaking, she answered, tucking her pencil behind her ear. Sophie, it's me, came Amy's excited voice. You're not going to believe this. Sophie sat up straighter. What's going on? I just heard from a contact at the New York Chronicle. Daniel and Madison are throwing a full-blown engagement soiree at the Four Seasons next week. And guess what? They're apparently inviting everyone from your old social crowd, friends, colleagues, even a few of your former clients. Sophie's stomach twisted. Wait, what? Why on earth would they invite me? Well, that's the thing, Amy said. From what I heard, Daniel didn't want you invited. But Madison insisted. She told the Chronicle she wants to set a tone of harmony moving forward. Amy hesitated. Or maybe she just wants to show off. Sophie let out a slow breath. She hadn't expected Daniel's engagement to become such public theater. But then again, knowing him, maybe she should have. Thanks for the heads up, Sophie said. If an invitation actually shows up, I'll think long and hard before responding. Just remember, you don't owe them anything, Amy said firmly. So, how's Julian? At the mention of his name, Sophie's lips curved into a small smile. He's good. Actually, he wants to introduce me to some of his people at a fundraiser next week. Ooh, look at you, Amy teased. High society already? Apparently, Sophie chuckled. It's going to be a busy week. Well, if you need a +1 to Daniel's circus or a bodyguard, I'm in, Amy joked. They hung up, and Sophie sat for a long moment, staring at the receiver in her hand. She could already picture the engagement party, glamorous, dripping with money, the perfect backdrop for Daniel to show off his next chapter. Madison Lee, old money Boston roots, corporate attorney with a sharp reputation. To Daniel, it wasn't just a relationship, it was a merger. That afternoon, a courier arrived at the studio, delivering a large, cream-colored envelope, thick and ornate with gold embossing. Sophie's pulse jumped. The return address read, Mr. Daniel Blake and Miss Madison Lee. So the rumors were true. They'd really invited her. She opened the envelope and pulled out the heavy cardstock, an invitation detailing a black tie soiree at the Four Seasons, complete with cocktails, dinner, and a curated guest list. Sophie folded the invitation back into the envelope, unsure whether to toss it in the trash or file it away in a drawer she'd never open again. Part of her believed this was a calculated move by Madison, to look magnanimous, or to prove something. Later that evening, as she curled up at home, the envelope still sat untouched on her counter. She'd show it to Julian. Maybe they'd just skip it entirely. Sophie had little desire to watch Daniel flaunt his fiancée in front of a room full of people, many of whom still remembered their past. And yet, a small voice inside her wondered, would it be healing? To walk in with someone who genuinely cared for her, someone who saw her worth, and show them that she was no longer the shattered version of herself Daniel had left behind? She picked up her phone and called Julian. He answered on the second ring. Sophie. Hey, I was just thinking about you. Well, she said with a wry tone, I just received something interesting. Oh? An invitation to Daniel and Madison's engagement soiree. There was a brief pause. How are you feeling about it? Julian asked gently. Sophie curled up on her couch, hugging a throw pillow to her chest. Conflicted, she admitted. Part of me wants to toss it. But another part of me, I don't know. Maybe I'm curious. Maybe I want closure. Or maybe I just want to walk in there looking whole. She hesitated. Madison specifically invited me. It feels like a setup, but maybe I'm reading too much into it. Julian's voice was calm and grounding. Whatever you decide, I've got you. If you want to go, I'll be by your side. If not, we'll spend the night somewhere far away from all that nonsense. Sophie smiled softly, his reassurance washing away some of the tension. I'll think about it, she said. But in the meantime, we've still got your fundraiser next week. That's where I'll focus my energy. What Sophie didn't know was how dramatically those two worlds, Daniel and Madison's and Julian's, were about to intersect. And when they did, it would change everything. The following week arrived in a whirlwind of nerves and anticipation. Sophie stood in front of a full-length mirror in Julian's penthouse, a sleek, modern space with sweeping views of Central Park. She wore a floor-length emerald green gown that hugged her figure and shimmered under the soft lighting. Amy had come by earlier to help with her hair, twisting it into a loose, polished style. Now her reflection radiated quiet strength. She wasn't sure if she felt it completely, but she looked like it. Julian approached, adjusting his cufflinks. "You look breathtaking," he murmured, leaning in to kiss her temple. "Ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be?" Sophie said with a nervous smile. Still not entirely sure who's going to be there. Julian hesitated. "It'll be a mix of people. Philanthropists, investors, even a few public figures and advocates. These events can get overwhelming, so if at any point you want to slip out, just let me know." She nodded, grateful for the out. They arrived at the grand ballroom of the Laurelwood Hotel, where cameras flashed and luxury cars pulled up in sequence. The crowd was a parade of bespoke gowns, designer tuxedos, and dazzling jewelry. Sophie stayed close to Julian as they stepped onto the carpet, and only when they crossed the threshold into the opulent ballroom did she allow herself to breathe again. Inside, the space was glowing. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above, and servers moved gracefully through the crowd with silver trays of champagne. Almost instantly, a striking woman with auburn hair swept toward them, exuding grace and familiarity. "Julian, darling," she cooed, air-kissing both of his cheeks. "So good to see you." Then her sharp gaze turned toward Sophie. "And who is this stunning lady?" Julian smiled and placed a light hand on Sophie's back. "Monica, meet Sophie Bennett, my girlfriend. Sophie, this is Monica Herrera, a board member at the Global Arts Foundation." Monica's eyes sparkled. "A pleasure, my dear. Julian mentioned you're an architect? How marvelous. We simply must talk about the cultural center we're designing in Brooklyn." They exchanged pleasantries. Monica's energy was both dazzling and slightly overwhelming. As more guests made their way over, the conversations took on a familiar rhythm. Cordial introductions, light questions about Sophie's work, then swift pivots toward charitable projects, networking, or global initiatives. Sophie quickly realized this was a different world. A world where fortunes and influence flowed behind polished handshakes, where philanthropic gestures were also strategic alliances, and social capital was currency. Midway through the evening, she slipped away for a few minutes, wandering toward a gallery-style display showcasing the Foundation's achievements. Images of clinics built in underserved regions, scholarship recipients holding art portfolios, and environmental restoration projects on multiple continents. She was quietly reading a plaque about a marine conservation initiative in Africa when a voice called from behind. "Sophie Bennett, is that you?" The voice was male and vaguely familiar. She turned to see David Russell, a man she hadn't seen in years. He was once a business acquaintance of Daniel's, someone Daniel had consulted with during his real estate ventures. David's eyes widened in pleasant surprise. "Wow, I almost didn't recognize you. How have you been?" Sophie offered a polite, practiced smile. "I'm well, thanks. Didn't expect to see you here." "I'm a sponsor," David replied, swirling the wine in his glass. "Always good for business to support noble causes, right?" He flashed a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Actually," he added, "I've got a seat next to Daniel Blake at the engagement event. You thinking of going?" Sophie's posture subtly tightened. "Still deciding," she said coolly. David gave a low chuckle. "You should. Daniel's been bragging about Madison nonstop. Something about her father's friends in D.C. He's clearly riding high. You might want to see what you're missing." A ripple of irritation flared in Sophie's chest. She straightened, her voice calm but firm. "Trust me, I'm not missing anything. Besides, I'm here with someone else." She cast a quick glance around, scanning for Julian. David caught the cue. "All right, I'll let you go. Take care, Sophie." He wandered off, wineglass in hand, leaving behind nothing but the aftertaste of old arrogance. Sophie let out a slow breath and leaned gently against the display, grounding herself once more. Suddenly, a warm hand touched Sophie's shoulder. She turned to find Julian standing there, concern etched across his features. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just someone from my past." "Let's go get some air," she added softly. He nodded and guided her to a quiet terrace overlooking the city skyline. The cool night breeze brushed against her cheeks, soothing and sharp at once. She closed her eyes for a moment, grounding herself in Julian's steady presence behind her. "Sophie," he said in a low voice, "I know running into people from your past can stir up things you'd rather leave behind, but I hope you know, I'm here for you. Always." She turned to face him, blinking back sudden emotion. Thank you, she whispered. I'm okay. It's just my ex-husband's engagement party is only days away, and I guess part of me is still working through all the ways he used to make me feel small. I don't want to be that woman who can't let go. Julian reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're not that woman, he said firmly, but if going to that party will help you put it behind you for good, I'll be right there next to you. A warm flicker of gratitude bloomed in her chest. I appreciate that, she said, stepping closer to rest her head on his shoulder. High above the city, with skyscrapers glittering around them like stars, Sophie sensed a shift. Subtle, but undeniable. Something in the air had changed. Something that told her Daniel's engagement celebration would be more than just a social event. Secrets were circling just beneath the surface. Secrets with the power to reshape everything she thought she knew about her past and her future. When the night of the engagement soiree arrived, the Four Seasons Hotel shimmered with excess and grandeur. Sophie walked in hand with Julian. After much reflection, she decided to attend, not out of spite, but because closing the chapter on her marriage to Daniel deserved intention and finality. Julian, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, exuded calm beside her, her shield and her strength. Sophie wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her figure and brought out the dark richness of her hair. As she stepped onto the red carpet lined with flashing cameras and bustling guests, she felt a confidence that had taken years to earn. Inside, the hotel foyer was adorned with opulent floral arrangements, and the soft strains of a string quartet filled the air. Waiters moved effortlessly through the crowd, balancing flutes of champagne and elegant hors d'oeuvres. Moments later, Daniel appeared. He looked polished, composed, his suit flawlessly tailored. His eyes widened in clear surprise when he spotted Sophie and Julian together. At his side stood Madison, luminous in a silver gown that caught every light in the room. Her auburn hair was styled into a sweeping, regal updo. She took a moment to study Sophie, and then her lips curved into a polite smile. Sophie, she said, stepping forward with a hand extended, I'm so glad you could make it. Daniel mentioned he ran into you recently. Sophie accepted the handshake, her gaze briefly dropping to the enormous diamond on Madison's ring finger. Thank you for the invitation, Sophie replied evenly. It's a beautiful event. Sophie returned the smile, polite but measured. Thank you for the invitation. Daniel cleared his throat, glancing at Julian. Julian, he said, offering a curt nod. Good to see you again. Julian gave a quiet, respectful nod in return. Likewise. Congratulations on your engagement. An awkward pause hung in the air before Madison gently touched Daniel's arm. We should say hello to the Carsons, she said sweetly, steering him toward another group of guests. Sophie let out a quiet breath, casting Julian a grateful look. Well, that wasn't too painful, she whispered, though her heart still thudded in her chest. They made their way deeper into the ballroom, sampling canapés and exchanging pleasantries with familiar faces. Sophie soon spotted Amy, waving enthusiastically from a corner, her boyfriend in tow. The friends caught up for a while, with Amy sneaking in sarcastic commentary about Daniel's taste in floral arrangements. Even so, a thread of tension remained woven through the night. From across the room, Daniel and Madison moved like social royalty. Madison was elegance incarnate, graceful in every gesture. Daniel, for his part, looked pleased, too pleased, as he introduced her to investors, colleagues, and media representatives. It was a choreographed performance of power and charm, and Sophie couldn't look away. Then, a hush swept through the room as Daniel stepped up to a microphone. His voice carried easily across the crowd. Good evening, everyone. Madison and I want to thank you for being here tonight to help us celebrate this new chapter in our lives. We're so grateful to have you here. Polite applause followed. Madison stepped forward, taking the mic with practiced poise. It means the world to us to have our friends and family supporting us tonight. Daniel and I are so excited for the future ahead. Another round of applause rippled through the crowd. Daniel handed the mic off to the band, which launched into a lively tune as waiters floated by with fresh champagne flutes. Julian leaned close to Sophie. You've handled yourself like royalty tonight. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I think this is all the closure I needed. Ready to make a quiet exit? She nodded slightly, until a sharp, familiar voice cut in behind them. Leaving already? And here I thought you'd at least congratulate the happy couple properly. Sophie turned slowly. It was Patricia Blake, Daniel's mother, clad in a strand of perfectly matched pearls and a face full of disapproval. Patricia had once adored Sophie, until the divorce, when her warmth cooled to disdain. Sophie held her expression steady. "Hello, Patricia?" The older woman's eyes swept over Julian from head to toe. "And who is this gentleman?" Before Sophie could speak, Julian stepped forward with practiced grace. "Julian Carter, ma'am. I'm here with Sophie." Patricia's gaze narrowed ever so slightly, as if calculating his worth with a glance. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" Julian remained composed. "Possibly at a charity function or foundation dinner," he replied smoothly. "That must be it," Patricia said with a sniff before turning her sharp focus back to Sophie. "I suppose it's good you've moved on, though some of us wonder if you ever truly understood what Daniel brought into your life." Julian's jaw flexed subtly, but he said nothing, leaving the floor to Sophie. She didn't flinch. "With all due respect," Sophie said, voice calm but unwavering, "I don't think that's your concern anymore. I wish Daniel and Madison well." Patricia's lips thinned. "Well, enjoy the evening," she said, pivoting away with a trail of cold air in her wake. Julian placed a reassuring hand at the small of Sophie's back. "You all right?" "Fine," she said quietly. "Let's get some fresh air." They stepped onto a small terrace where the city lights stretched endlessly beneath them. The ballroom's music and conversation faded to a soft murmur. Sophie exhaled slowly, finally releasing the tension Patricia had stirred. "She always had a way of making me feel like I'd never measure up," she admitted. Julian rubbed her shoulder gently. "You've more than measured up. I'm proud of you, for everything." A gust of wind tousled her hair. She turned toward Julian, just about to thank him, when a sudden wave of noise from inside the ballroom cut through the quiet. They exchanged a glance and stepped back inside to find Daniel at the microphone again, this time with Madison by his side, both looking visibly tense. "Please, everyone remain calm," Daniel's voice echoed through the speakers. The crowd shifted, uneasy. Sophie noticed a tall security guard weaving through guests, heading straight for them. "Excuse me, Mr. Carter," the man said, eyes darting between Julian and the stage. "Could you come with me for a moment, sir?" Sophie's heart dropped. She clutched Julian's arm. "What's going on?" The guard looked unsure. "We received a tip that a certain guest may be here under false pretenses." A hush fell across the room. Heads turned. Daniel's voice boomed again. "Julian Carter, we need to verify your credentials. We can't allow unauthorized guests at this event." A ripple of disbelief moved through the crowd. Sophie stared at Daniel, stunned. "You invited us, indirectly, but still." Madison stepped forward quickly, eyes flicking nervously between the two men. "Daniel, this isn't necessary. Let's not escalate this." Julian raised both hands calmly, unfazed by the mounting spectacle. "It's all right," Julian said calmly, turning to the guard. "I'm happy to clarify who I am." He scanned the crowd, eyes narrowing. "Though I would like to know, who exactly made this accusation?" A murmur spread through the room as curious whispers turned into hushed speculation. Sophie's glare locked on Daniel, wondering if this was his idea of some twisted power play. Daniel looked genuinely surprised. Patricia, standing stiffly to the side, wore the faint smirk of someone who felt vindicated. Then a voice from the corner cut through the tension. "I made the call," said a clipped, authoritative voice. All eyes turned to an older gentleman in a tailored suit. Sophie recognized him instantly. Madison's father, Gerald Lee. He stepped forward slowly, fixing Julian with a scrutinizing look. "There have been rumors about you, Mr. Carter, that you claim wealth and philanthropy, but no one seems to know where your money comes from. We can't just let anyone walk into our circle without due diligence." Sophie felt the heat rise in her chest. "He's not just anyone, he's—" Julian gently squeezed her hand, a silent signal to let him handle it. Turning to face Gerald, Julian remained completely composed. "Sir, you're not wrong. I do tend to keep my financial life private, but I can assure you I'm more than qualified to be here tonight. If you'd prefer, we can step aside to verify any credentials you require." An uneasy stillness settled in the room. Daniel looked unsure. Madison looked mortified. The guard hovered, clearly waiting for direction. Julian reached calmly into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew a sleek business card. He handed it to the security guard. Call the number on the card. My office will confirm I'm a principal investor in Architect Holdings, among other ventures. A wave of realization rippled through the crowd. Architect Holdings, one of the most influential names in the emerging tech space. Gerald's face twitched. He snatched the card and stared at it, realization dawning. Daniel's confusion gave way to something closer to discomfort. Possibly envy. Madison's father exhaled, clearly grasping the severity of his misstep. The guard, now speaking softly into his earpiece, listened intently before finally nodding. It's confirmed, sir. My sincere apologies, Mr. Carter. He stepped back, granting Julian his space. The room fell into a strained silence. Julian turned to Daniel and Madison, voice steady. Congratulations again on your engagement. We'll be on our way. Without another word, he gently took Sophie's arm and led her toward the exit. Amy followed closely behind, muttering under her breath about the circus they'd just endured. Outside, in the lobby, Sophie's emotions bubbled over the moment they stepped into the lobby. I can't believe they tried to throw you out like some kind of imposter, she said, blinking back tears of fury. Julian's expression softened. I've dealt with worse, he said gently. Let's just go home. But as they stepped out into the crisp night air, one thought crystallized in Sophie's mind. Daniel and Madison hadn't just tried to humiliate her. They'd gone after Julian too. The gloves were off now. The next time their worlds collided, it wouldn't be quiet, and it wouldn't be clean. The following morning, social media exploded. Gossip blogs and tabloids pounced on the drama from the Four Seasons like bloodhounds on a scent. Headlines screamed across screens, billionaire investor mistaken for gatecrasher. And Fiancée's father sparks showdown at lavish engagement soiree. Sophie woke to a stream of texts from Amy, gleefully updating her on the online chaos. Even Daniel had called her late in the night, leaving a voicemail that she'd ignored. Still, curiosity got the better of her. She played it. Daniel's voice was tight, uncertain. Sophie, hey, I'm sorry about what happened tonight. I honestly didn't know my future father-in-law would act like that. Look, maybe we could talk sometime soon. Clear the air, let me know. She hit delete. She wasn't interested in his excuses. Not now. Yet somewhere beneath the annoyance, there was a quiet pulse of satisfaction. Julian's identity was out, fully and publicly. No more speculation, no more mystery. He wasn't just the man quietly supporting her. He was a force, someone who moved in powerful spaces and still chose her without pretense. That morning, Julian invited her to his penthouse for breakfast. They sat across from each other in the warm, sunlit living area, coffee in hand, a spread of pastries between them. Julian broke down the night's drama with a faint, amused smile. I guess the Lees now think I conned my way into high society. Sophie frowned over her mug. It's not fair. You've done more for communities and causes than half the people in that ballroom, and still, you have to prove yourself? Julian shrugged lightly. Money complicates things. People either want something from you, or they assume you've got some hidden agenda. He reached across the table and brushed his thumb over her hand. That's part of why I keep quiet about it, but I don't want you caught in the crossfire. Either way, Sophie said softly, threading her fingers through Julian's. I'm proud of who you are. If anyone has a problem with it, that's their issue, not yours. A gentle warmth flickered in Julian's eyes. He leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Just then his phone buzzed. He glanced down, and his brows furrowed. Everything okay? Sophie asked, setting her coffee down. Julian sighed. It's an urgent situation. One of my companies is in the middle of a tense acquisition deal. I might need to fly to San Francisco tomorrow. Concern crept across Sophie's face. For how long? A few days, maybe a week. I'm not sure yet, he said, exhaling. The timing's awful. I hate leaving right after all of this. She offered a reassuring smile. Go. Handle what you need to handle. I'll be fine. They spent the rest of the day together, walking through Central Park, browsing a small local art exhibit, choosing, for now, to ignore the firestorm of media coverage still rippling online. Sophie felt a growing peace when she was with Julian. Like whatever chaos brewed outside, they could weather it together. Yet beneath the calm, a sense of caution remained. She knew Daniel. He hated losing control, and he really hated being outshone. Now that Julian's identity had gone public, Sophie could imagine the resentment brewing, and when Daniel felt threatened, he never stayed quiet for long. Her instincts weren't wrong. Later that afternoon, just as Sophie was about to head back to her apartment, her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Sophie, it's Madison." The voice was tight, shaky with forced calm. "Can we meet?" I need to talk to you about Daniel." Sophie's pulse skipped. Madison? Her mind spun with possibilities. Was this a setup? A confrontation? But the hadn't sounded angry. It had sounded almost scared. They agreed to meet the next afternoon at a quiet tea house. When Sophie hung up, a knot settled in her stomach. There had been no arrogance or gloating in Madison's tone. If anything, she sounded like someone teetering on the edge. Maybe, just maybe, the pristine surface of Daniel and Madison's perfect relationship was starting to fracture. And if it was, what secrets were about to fall out? The following day, clouds hung low over the city as Sophie slid into a corner booth at Marlowe's Tea Room in Midtown. The little shop was known for its artisan teas and peaceful atmosphere. Madison arrived a few minutes later, wrapped in a sleek black trench over a cream blouse. Her posture was stiff, every movement strained. "Thank you for meeting me," Madison said quietly, settling across from Sophie. Her hands trembled slightly as she removed her coat. Sophie studied her face, faint shadows under the eyes, tension around the mouth. She didn't look like the glamorous fiancée from the engagement party. "No problem," Sophie replied, folding her hands on the table. "What's going on?" A server approached, and Madison quietly ordered chamomile tea. Sophie requested Earl Grey. The silence between them lingered until the server stepped away. Madison cleared her throat, visibly trying to gather herself. "I know this might sound strange, but I don't have many people I can talk to about Daniel." Sophie's brow furrowed slightly. "He never really talks about me, does he?" Madison gave a nervous laugh. "Barely. But I looked into your past. I know how your marriage ended, how fast and how painful it must have been." Sophie felt a tightness in her chest. "What exactly do you want to know?" Madison laced her fingers together. "Is he always like this? So controlling?" "I saw glimpses last night. The way he handled what happened with Julian, he was livid. Not because his future father-in-law caused a scene, but because he felt overshadowed." She paused, her voice lowering. "We had a huge fight afterward." Sophie studied her face, debating how honest to be. But what was the point of sugarcoating it now? "Daniel has a need to win," she said finally. "Everything in our marriage turned into a contest. At first in college he was driven, but kind. Over time that drive became obsession." She leaned back slightly. "He started setting impossible expectations, and when I couldn't meet them, he'd cut me down. I wasn't his partner, I was a benchmark to beat." Madison's eyes glistened. "I'm starting to see that too. After the party, he stormed around our place, raging about how he wouldn't let some nobody steal his spotlight. I told him Julian clearly isn't a nobody, and Daniel lost it." She looked down at her hands. "I have money, connections, but he sees me as a ladder. One more rung to climb." Sophie felt a flicker of sympathy, despite everything. She knew how charming Daniel could be, how he painted grand visions of a future so bright, you didn't notice how far into his shadow you were standing. "So why reach out to me?" Sophie asked gently. Madison hesitated. Her eyes darted across the tea shop, as if scanning for eavesdroppers. "Because I don't know if I can go through with this engagement, and I need to know. Has Daniel ever done anything questionable, financially or otherwise?" Sophie's pulse ticked faster. "Why?" "My father's pressuring me to move forward, but I'm scared." Sophie's thoughts drifted back to their final years together. Daniel suggesting they use her savings for a risky property flip, then calling her unsupportive when she refused. Always spinning things to benefit himself. "I can't say he ever broke the law," she said slowly. "But Daniel knows how to manipulate a situation. He's very good at making sure he wins, no matter who loses." Madison exhaled like a balloon deflating. "I see," she murmured. Just then their teas arrived. Madison stirred hers absent-mindedly, lost in thought. Madison stared down at her tea, stirring slowly. "He's pressuring me to sign a prenup," she said quietly. "One that heavily favors him. Something about protecting future earnings tied to my father's investments." Sophie's eyebrows shot up. "That's a massive red flag." "I know," Madison whispered, voice trembling. "He wants it signed before we even set a wedding date. My father calls it standard business, but I'm not comfortable with it. And last night, the way he exploded about Julian, it made me realize I don't even know the man I'm supposed to marry." A wave of reluctant sympathy swept over Sophie. For all her own anger at Daniel, she couldn't deny that Madison seemed genuinely shaken, perhaps even trapped in something she couldn't see a way out of. "You have every right to take a step back," Sophie said gently. "Listen, if you ever need to talk or just a safe place to breathe, you can call me. I'm not your enemy. Daniel is part of my past now." Madison bowed her head, the words seeming to break through her internal storm. "Thank you. I really appreciate that." They both sipped their tea, letting the quiet hang between them like a fragile truce. After a moment, Madison spoke again. "I'm planning to talk to Daniel about postponing everything. I need time. I need to feel secure." Sophie remembered all too well how Daniel reacted to being challenged, how swiftly his charm turned to cruelty. "Whatever you decide," she said carefully, "just be safe. Daniel doesn't handle feeling cornered well. If he feels betrayed, he lashes out. Keep people close who will support you. Don't isolate." Madison nodded slowly, blinking away tears. "I will. And Sophie, I'm really sorry about the way my father treated Julian. He assumes everyone wants something from us. But he was wrong and out of line." Sophie managed a soft smile. Apology accepted. They parted outside Marlowe's tea room. The sky above was heavy with clouds, the wind picking up as Madison walked away, shoulders drawn tight. Sophie stood for a moment, watching her go, conflicted. She felt pity for Madison, revulsion toward Daniel, and a strange sense of relief that she'd made it out of that life. But she also knew this conversation wouldn't stay private. If Madison challenged Daniel, truly challenged him, he'd show his true face, the one Sophie had seen behind closed doors, the one that never forgave and never forgot. A storm was building, and when it broke, it wouldn't just be personal, it would be public. The next morning, Sophie awoke to a string of frantic texts from Amy. Half asleep, she rubbed her eyes and grabbed the remote. When she turned on the TV, a red banner blazed across the bottom of the screen. Breaking news: Daniel Blake under investigation for corporate fraud. Just days after his extravagant engagement soiree, Daniel was suddenly the subject of a high-profile investigation. News outlets reported that he had falsified financial documents related to a corporate merger, allegedly leveraging his fiancée's family connections for personal gain. Sophie sat frozen as the details poured in, feeling a storm of emotions. Shock, a flicker of vindication, and an odd, distant sorrow for a man she'd once shared a life with. Her phone rang again. It was Amy. "Sophie, oh my God, did you see the news?" Amy blurted out. "Madison's dad, Mr. Lee, he pulled all his support from Daniel's projects. And the crazy part? Word is Madison turned over evidence, like actual documents, to the investigators." Sophie blinked. "Madison?" "Yep, she's out. Broke off the engagement too. Daniel's got no money, no allies, and apparently no clue how to handle it." As the call ended, Sophie sat in stunned silence. Then her phone rang again, this time an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Sophie." Daniel's voice rasped across the line, unmistakably frantic. "I have nothing left. They froze my accounts. Madison's gone. You have to help me." His words poured out in a mess of panic and desperation. She could almost hear him pacing on the other end, fury simmering just beneath the surface. "Daniel," she said coolly, "I'm not your wife anymore, and your mess is not my responsibility." He let out a bitter laugh. "Of course, everyone's turning their backs now. These society types, they're all the same. They act like they're above it all, but it's all a game. I played the game. Now I'm the villain? Even you?" His voice twisted into accusation. "You think Julian and his billions will always be there for you? Don't forget who knew you first." Sophie's jaw clenched, but her tone stayed even. "My life isn't tied to yours anymore. Don't call me again." She ended the call, and for the first time in years, she felt free. Daniel's downfall wasn't her burden to carry. Not anymore. He was just a warning now, a name tied to ambition without integrity. She'd let him go. Completely. 2 days later, Julian returned from his San Francisco trip. The moment Sophie saw him step into the penthouse, relief washed over her. She dropped her bag and crossed the room, wrapping her arms tightly around him. Julian held her, gently brushing his hand through her hair. "I missed you," he murmured. "Same," she said softly, leading him toward the couch. As they settled, her tone turned more serious. "While you were gone, Daniel's world imploded. He's under investigation. Madison ended the engagement, and he's calling me, begging for help. Julian's expression darkened with concern. He contacted you directly? She nodded. He wants money for a better lawyer. I refused, Sophie said quietly. It felt cold, but I couldn't let him pull me back into that chaos. Julian exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. I'm proud of you. You set a boundary. If you ever feel unsafe, I'll do whatever it takes to protect you. The next few hours passed in quiet conversation, catching up after his trip and discussing the whirlwind of legal drama now surrounding Daniel. Even the tabloids had latched onto the scandal, spinning narratives that pitted Julian's quiet influence against Daniel's very public downfall. Sophie hated the gossip, but Julian was unfazed. These things pass, he said gently. Let them talk, it'll fade. That evening, they attended a charity art auction benefiting emerging local artists. As they entered the gallery, camera flashes lit the entrance. Julian, now unmistakably known as one of the city's most generous philanthropists. Sophie stiffened at the attention, but Julian leaned close and whispered, Relax, we're here for the art, remember? Buoyed by his calm, she wandered the exhibit, admiring bold textures and vibrant palettes, until one piece in particular stopped her in her tracks. A striking modern canvas full of movement and emotion. Julian noticed her admiration, and when bidding opened, he quietly outbid everyone, winning the piece with a satisfied smile. Later that night, they hosted a small celebration in Julian's penthouse, commemorating both Sophie's new hotel design contract and the arrival of the painting she now adored. Amy arrived first, hugging Sophie tightly and launching into the latest gossip about Daniel, from canceled deals to angry investors demanding refunds. Part of Sophie still felt a twinge of sadness at how far Daniel had fallen. But more than anything, she felt clarity. She had made the right choice. Much later, after their guests had gone, she and Julian curled up in the warm glow of the living room. The city stretched out before them, lights glittering like stars through the panoramic windows. The painting now hung in perfect symmetry behind them. Sophie swirled her wine, her gaze drifting across the skyline. I never imagined this, she murmured, voice catching. A year ago, I was still sifting through pieces of myself. Now, everything feels open, like anything's possible. Julian turned to her, his expression soft. He took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. You deserve a partner who sees your light, he said, not someone who dims it to make himself feel brighter. He smiled faintly. And for the record, all the money, all the connections, I admire how independent you are. I'm here for you. But you've already shown the world you don't need anyone to validate your worth. His words settled deep into her chest, dissolving the last wisps of self-doubt. They stood together before the wide windows, the city a canvas of light and motion below. Sophie leaned her head against Julian's shoulder, remembering the woman she used to be, the one Daniel made feel small and uncertain. It was more than enough. Sophie had reclaimed her life, reignited her passion for architecture, and opened her heart to a man who nurtured her dreams rather than stifling them. Outside, the wild rhythm of New York carried on, unmoved by one man's disgrace or another's quiet assent. But inside the calm of Julian's penthouse, Sophie felt something profound. Peace. Renewal. Liberation. Daniel's story belonged to the tabloids now. And she stood on the threshold of something beautiful, hand in hand with a man whose steady support and quiet devotion meant more to her than any grand gesture ever could. Thank you for walking this path with us, through heartbreak, scandal, and ultimately empowerment. Sophie's story is proof that even when life falls apart, when love turns toxic and betrayal seems inevitable, we can rebuild stronger, wiser, and freer. She emerged from her divorce not bitter, but brave, and found love, not with a savior, but with a partner. A man of integrity who saw her not as a prize, but as a force. Daniel's collapse was a painful lesson in unchecked pride, but Sophie didn't seek vengeance. She didn't look back. She simply moved forward, into the joy she had always deserved. If this story moved you, please tap that like button and share it with someone who loves a journey of resilience and redemption. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable tales of love, loss, and the strength to begin again. Your support means everything. Thank you for watching.